When you have health problems, it's natural when you go to the doctor to want to talk about exactly what the symptoms are, or about the various diagnoses that you may have had. The problem is that when you are an ME-CFS patient, this kind of approach can actually be fraught with serious risks. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the problems which this kind of naivety or of medical professionals can bring if you happen to be an ME-CFS patient. First, my name is Patrick Usher, and I am author of the book Understanding ME-CFS and Strategies for Healing, in which I break down some of the latest, most exciting breakthrough research into ME-CFS and long COVID, as well as talking about a range of treatment strategies that I have tried in order to improve my own quality of life as an ME patient. You can find links for that book, as well as to a free sample, in the description box below. So at the moment I'm coming out of a bad crash. I wanted to make a video, but I'm not feeling up to talking about the research, so I thought just do a simpler video talking about the human side of things. And this topic of ME-CFS patient naivety when it comes to sharing their situation with doctors is something that I've heard my friend Ray talking about over at the True ME-CFS Uncensored channel. Ray is someone I've had also on my channel a few months ago, and he often talks about the risks of being too trusting of medical professionals. And I wanted also to talk about this. So I'm going to today just talk about what are the problems of being overly trusting of doctors when you're sharing problems that you're going through. What are the risks of talking about ME-CFS symptoms? What are the risks of talking about a previous diagnosis of ME-CFS? And how one often has to calculate, kind of strategically, whether it's actually wise to do so. As I talk through these issues, I'm also going to talk about some of my own personal examples that I've had, particularly in the first few years of being ill, when I was actually genuinely naive about how I would go about this, and as a result, I ran into problems. And then at the end, I'm gonna talk about what is the solution to this problem. How can you actually kind of go about this better? And I don't think I actually have the answer to that. So I'm going to be interested to hear, what have you come up with? How do you approach talking about your problems with doctors? But anyway, so as I say, back in the first few years of my illness, I was naive about this, and I would go into medical appointments with intention, with the belief that it was my duty to describe all of the symptoms that I was having, and sometimes as well to actually talk about ME-CFS. My GP felt that I had it back in 2018 at the beginning, and then it was kind of confirmed by a specialist in 2021, but to actually go in and talk about that openly. And I would do that even though I knew that doctors weren't very much aware of the research, but I had this belief that they would be interested, that they would accept that it's a valid condition, that they would be somewhat aware of at least some of the findings, and that they might respond with, I know this is serious, but I don't know how much about it, but I'm happy to walk with you, as we try and find ways for you to improve. So I kind of went in with that attitude that it was my obligation, my duty to actually describe accurately what was happening, to talk about ME-CFS openly, and with the expectation that that would be met in a very supportive way, and in the understanding that the research was really uncovering this bit by bit, and it's kind of, not as established as it needs to be, but that it is real and that the research is ongoing. And of course, there are some doctors who are like that, even though they don't know very much about this. They are curious, they want to learn. And I think that long COVID in particular has helped to change some of the atmosphere in the medical profession around these kinds of illnesses. I know some ME patients who have been in hospital, and they were asked, do you have any other conditions? And they said, I have ME-CFS. And the doctors were genuinely interested to learn in the experience of that patient, because they said, we're trying to get our heads around long COVID and we understand it's very similar to your condition. Can you please tell us more? And so those are people who are open and really, understand that the medical landscape is always changing. It's never, set in stone, and new things are being learned about, and they want to be part of that. And that's wonderful, and it does happen. But unfortunately, in general, I think it's still fair to say that there is this significant problem of historical stigma, and there's still this problem of the fact that 99% of doctors are taught nothing about ME-CFS in their training. And the sad truth is that for a lot of doctors, ME-CFS is an in-joke. They actually find it, well, both funny and also an annoyance. They find it irritating because from their perspective, they've not been taught the tests to do. They've not been taught the research. So they do all their tests and they find nothing. That's just because, they're looking in the wrong place, so they don't find anything. And they get frustrated and they complain about it to their colleagues, and they regard these patients as irritating and a joke, basically. And these are the doctors who, when you go to them, they have that arrogance, that dismissiveness. They don't want to hear about it. They, kind of put down your problems. And you see, that's what they're doing when they're in professional mode. And it's already not professional, and it's already, can be disgraceful. But imagine what they're like when they're just talking to their colleagues who have a similar mindset, when they don't have to be professional. I have seen, I think it's called Pulse magazine. It's a magazine for the NHS in England. And there was some article about ME-CFS, and you go and look at the comments, which are all written by doctors, and they were horrendous, right? They were horrendous. I think the article was about how there was going to be some more training for doctors about ME-CFS. The pushback in the comments by these doctors, who were obviously writing under anonymity in a comments section, was basically that they didn't want to have to deal or learn more about the crazies. So this is what a lot of doctors are thinking about privately. And unfortunately, this is the narrative that has built up. And because so many doctors talk about it to themselves, it's accepted within the system. And it's kind of extraordinary because it's like these people don't know the history of medicine. They don't know the other conditions like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's, which were once viewed in these kinds of ways as psychosomatic, or hysterical women doing their thing. They don't know that, and they don't know about the way that this has always been how the medical system has gone. They think something is hysterical, and then a few decades later they think it's a very serious disease. This is how it's always gone, and the same pattern is what's playing out right now in real time in relation to ME-CFS. They don't realise what they're part of, which is unbelievable actually, but they don't get it, that this is what's going on. And so the risk is actually still very great that if you go and describe your symptoms, they won't be equipped to deal with it, and they will get frustrated, and they will pigeonhole you, they will typecast you as that troublesome patient, as that malingering patient, or just someone who's, it's all in their head. The risk of that then is that will colour your future care. That will change what you get in the system. I've got a friend who's has ME-CFS and long COVID and post-vax syndrome. She's been struggling a lot recently, and a friend of hers who happens to be a nurse came to visit and was asked her how she was doing and what are the symptoms like, and basically then said, I think from what you're describing that you have a pulmonary embolism and you need to go to accident and emergency and get it checked out. So he took her there, and she was already known to this hospital. Their response was, we know you, we know the nature of your symptoms, we never find anything, you were here recently, we're not going to see you. And this is despite this nurse trying to explain to them that he thinks this situation is serious. And so this is where the real risk is presented. If you're honest, if you talk, from a position of the truth, what you're actually facing, what do you risk have happened to you as a result? Will you actually be sidelined because you're that difficult patient? Will you, by chance find a doctor who actually believes you? These are dilemmas that you have to face, because it's not always just about ME-CFS. You may have another problem. And what happens when you have that other problem and you go to the doctors, because you have ME-CFS on your record, you don't get the help that you need. I think you can see what I'm getting at is that this is a scenario, a situation that is fraught with serious risks and a real series of dilemmas. This video is sponsored by Normalite. Now, I have been using Normalite for 3 years, and it is the most helpful supplement that I have found in managing my own condition. Like a lot of ME-CFS patients, I suffer with low blood volume, and Normalite is a highly effective strategy for combating this issue. It is a form of oral rehydration solution, and one study by Meadow et al. From 2019 found that this kind of formulation can boost blood volume as effectively as a saline IV. When I drink Normalite, I really notice the difference. I can feel the blood volume expanding throughout my body, my legs become lighter, my nervous system calms down. Even better is that Normalite has been specifically created for patients with illnesses like ME-CFS, long COVID, and POTS. So check out the link below to order your own bags of Normalite. I personally enjoy the pure flavour, but it does come in a range of options. Now I'm going to talk about my own experience with this. So back in 2019, a year after becoming ill, I was living in France at that time, and I decided, even though my GP in Ireland had said ME-CFS, even though I knew it was ME-CFS because of the post-exertional malaise and so on, I said, I'm going to go and do my due diligence. I'm going to go to the local doctor and I'm going to describe my symptoms exactly, and I'm not going to mention ME-CFS. And I was doing that because I wanted to go through the system, get all of their tests, and at the end I wanted them to say, we haven't found anything going on, because I wanted to ensure that there wasn't anything else going on. I wanted to do my duty of care to myself, as it were. I described my symptoms exactly, and I thought he seemed reasonable enough. I noticed that he, a couple of times, seemed to kind of laugh a bit under his breath at me, or just sort of, I felt like there was he found something funny about me in some way. But I thought he seemed reasonable, and he said, we're going to get you to a general internist and we're going to investigate everything. And, it sounds like you may have some kind of adrenal problem, like Addison's or whatever. So I thought that sounded fine, and I waited. He was going to write a letter, and my dad went to pick up the letter for a referral for the internist. And the letter was sealed. But I'm someone who wants to know what direction things are going in, and I believe I have a right to see what was actually being said. And I know previously in Ireland, when I've had referral letters, they've never been sealed. You can read them yourself. But in France, I don't know, maybe they do things differently. Anyway, I opened the letter, and it's just as well that I did, because what this doctor had said, first of all, he had various things that could be categorized as in-jokes, between doctors, like, this is the patient, he'll have lots of notes and medical results of his own to tell you, ! And he picked out certain symptoms to just, in this letter, of the many that I had described, he picked out ones that made me sound like I was crazy. He'd ignored 90% of what I described and picked out the things that were, would cast me in a certain light. And he ended the letter by saying, I suspect that this patient has an hysterical neurotic conversion disorder and should be taken under the care of a psychiatric consultant. And needless to say, I did not take that appointment. What this particular experience highlights is that you can do your due diligence as a patient. You can be really responsible and go in and just want to describe exactly what's happening to you, and so that everything can be ruled out. But the risk of that is you could go through that system. Yes, everything outside of ME-CFS might be ruled out, but what you're forgetting with that approach is that the system has power. And at the end of that time, it has the power to say, you have instead a psychiatric condition, an hysterical neurotic conversion disorder. And then they can act on that, and they can actually treat you accordingly. And you may not have a choice. So it's not just about doing due diligence. You could end up doing that and actually end up in a situation where you'd have brought harm onto yourself, inadvertently. And I went to look up this hysterical neurotic conversion disorder on the French health system website. Like, it was almost a joke, because they were saying, we in France, while many countries, they have done away with hysterical neurotic conversion disorder, we maintain this proud Freudian tradition. What about medical science rather than maintaining proud Freudian traditions? But they said that basically the treatment would be to commit someone to an institution, give them a ton of tranquilizing drugs, and then convince them that there was nothing wrong with them. That was the treatment. And so that potentially is what I escaped having happened to me. And we know that there are cases where ME-CFS patients have been forcibly institutionalized because of these kinds of things. And so you're left with that risk. Describe your symptoms because you want to make sure that nothing is happening. Do you risk running into a diagnosis at the end which could actually bring you harm? Or do you not mention them at all and just try and deal with it all yourself. This is all a real dilemma. That's basically the point I'm trying to make. It's natural to want to trust doctors. This is what we grow up with. We turn to them when we are sick. But when you have an illness which they're not being taught about, it is a process which is imbued with risks and challenges. And so what I want to do is say, ask you, what do you do about this? How do you approach this challenge? Are you strategic? Have you decided never ever to mention ME-CFS or your symptoms and just go and, when you have an obviously other problem, just go and talk about that? Or have you decided to be more, for want of a better word, combative? To actually say, I'm going to stand up for ME-CFS. I'm going to be, ready to say, if they're kind of wanting to dismiss me, to say, what about this research? What about this paper? And I think, any of these can be reasonable. It's reasonable to want to be strategic and actually get care that can help you. But it's also reasonable to want to fight for change and actually go in with that kind of mindset. But if you do, you have to be ready for it. And this is where I've fallen down in the past, because I've just been blindsided by the responses that I have received. I've not been ready for them. I have been so trusting, so naive, that doctors would want to know about the research into ME-CFS. Can you believe? What a, kind of wild assumption to have made. But what I have learned in the process is that ME-CFS and closely related illnesses are the only conditions for which research doesn't actually matter. I've come to the point now where I actually just avoid going to doctors. I have my consultant who specialises in ME-CFS. I talk to him once a year on the phone. My principle now is I'm not going to go near the medical profession unless I obviously have another problem, or unless I want to do general bloods or have a specific test that I want to have investigated myself, because I have learnt that it is too risky. Although, of course, sometimes there is no easy answer. Like when I had the life-threatening symptoms, even though I ended up with a mental illness diagnosis, I think arguably I actually had to be in a hospital bed because it was that bad. So it is very complicated. Sometimes there won't be an easy or obvious answer, and we just have to muddle on through the best that we can. And the final thing to say is, I'm aware I'm speaking from a relatively position of, kind of luxury, in that I know I have ME-CFS. I have been diagnosed with ME-CFS. I've been able to research ME-CFS. But for most people facing these particular dilemmas, they're very ill and they don't know what's wrong with them. They don't know they have ME-CFS. They go to the doctor, they describe their problems, and the system is not there to support them. They are not given the diagnosis, and so they are left clueless about the nature of their problems. Like over the winter, I live in a small French village usually. I've met, last time I was there, I met 3 people who have had ME-CFS, and they never knew that's what they had. These were just ordinary people. One of them had it for 40 years, and she's just working in the, running the local cafe. She never knew what she had, because this kind of thing had been her experience. And so this is the real problem. People watching this and for myself, we know what's going on, but most people don't, and so what do they do? Anyway, that's it for this topic on naivety when it comes to trusting doctors and having ME-CFS, and this kind of strategic thinking that's necessary and the risks that are involved. Please leave down below in the comments your experience with this. What kind of approach have you settled on in trying to utilise the medical system the most effective way possible? Leave your thoughts down below. Before I say goodbye, please check out my newly launched Patreon and Discord community, which is about treatments and research. It's a group where we can support each other, help each other move forward. We have Zoom calls once a month. The first one was recently, and the next one should be on the 20th of September. I'm so far really enjoying this. It's a great way for me to engage with people who watch this channel, and also for you to support each other. And yeah, so check out the links down below. The first week is free, and otherwise it is just $7 a month. And that's it. I will see you in the next video. Until then, wishing you all the very best.